JD, and welcome everybody. We'll get started. Welcome to this webinar on creating viable and sustainable sanitation enterprises. This webinar is part of a series of market-based sanitation learning, including a foundational desk review conducted by USAID WASHPaLS. Today, the webinar will dig deeper into sanitation enterprise aspect of market-based sanitation. Before we get started, I wanted to tell you a little bit about this platform and the agenda for today. So what you should expect is roughly a 50 to 60 minute presentation, followed by a facilitated question and answer with the WASHPaLS team. My name is Jesse Shapiro, and I manage the WASHPaLS project on behalf of USAID, and I'll be facilitating today. During the presentation and webinar, we request all participants be on mute, but you can submit your questions through the chat box on your control panel. For those who have just joined in, the chat icon is on the top right pane of your screen, and if you click it, you'll see an opportunity to provide some questions there. You can submit those questions at any time during the webinar. We'll be collecting them during the Q&A, and then during the Q&A period, we'll have a facilitated discussion that will go through many of these questions if they're not answered in the chat box. The webinar will also be recorded and posted after if you like to rewatch it or share it with your network. Download links will be available in the chat box, the Blue Jeans connecting instructions email, and online at globalwaters.org/WASHPaLS. Recording of earlier webinars on market-based sanitation are also available there on the globalwaters.org website. Before we jump into the context, the webinar today is based on a guidance report and case studies on creating viable and sustainable enterprises prepared by USAID's WASHPaLS. WASHPaLS is WASH Partnership and Learning for Sustainability. This is a 5-year project from the USAID Global Health Bureau that includes several partners. It is led by Tetra Tech and a consortia that includes FSG, FHI 360, Acquia, and IRIS Group. You'll mainly be hearing from FSG today, who leads the market-based sanitation. To kick us off, we want to learn a little bit about your connections to market-based sanitation. You'll see a poll here on the screen. You'll want to go to mentimeter.com and enter that code that you see on the screen and use the link in the chat box to participate. While you're doing that, I will hand over the presentation now to our primary speaker, Subhash Januri of FSG, to take you through the presentation. Subhash is an associate director at FSG and a project manager for the market-based sanitation component of the WASHPaLS project. He is also one of the authors of the USAID's WASHPaLS Enterprise Viability and Sustainability Guidance Report presented today. Thank you very much, and over to you, Subhash.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Jesse. And on behalf of WASHPaLS, I'd like to first start by thanking USAID for this opportunity to conduct the study and get an opportunity to further the sector's evidence base and knowledge. I'd also like to thank our research partners, PSI India, WaterAid Nigeria, and Watershed Cambodia, without whom this study would not have been possible. So we can see the responses coming in, and you can see that we have the majority of program implementers, consultants, basically practitioners who work closely with sanitation enterprises on the ground. And as we go through the presentation and the Q&A, I'd love to see how these findings relate to your experience in the field and what kind of questions you might have. Great, I think we've got a sense of the distribution in the room, and we'll just now proceed with our presentation. Just pull my screen up. Here. So let's start by understanding why we were interested in the questions of viability and sustainability for sanitation enterprises. Entrepreneurs in any industry are primarily motivated by profit to start a business and continue operating over a period of time. And in case where the business makes a loss or the income is considered inadequate, they will consider it unviable and look for other opportunities. The sanitation markets are no different. If the sanitation enterprises do not make profits, existing entrepreneurs will get discouraged, while other potential entrepreneurs will refrain from starting new sanitation enterprises. As a result, even if a program successfully convinces households to purchase toilets, the inadequate capacity on the supply side will leave the demand unfulfilled. Therefore, the viability of these enterprises is critical to the success of MBS programs in the short term and for the broader sanitation market in the longer term. Now, despite its importance, our desk review that we conducted a while back had revealed that few MBS programs knew who or how well their partner enterprises were performing financially, or for that matter, why. Are they likely to continue in the longer term once the support from programs and their donors would end? And in other words, whether they were viable and sustainable. More importantly, what factors make some enterprises thrive while others fail? We pose this as our central research question. Now, at this point, I'd like to make an important clarification that by the term sanitation enterprise throughout this presentation only means businesses selling toilets. It does not refer to those offering fecal sludge management services such as waste collection, transport, or treatment. So we've used the terms viability and sustainability several times already. So let's pause to define them and see how they relate to a primary performance metric of profit. To the right, we see an illustrative enterprise run by Seda. Her enterprise sells toilets at a price at $50 each, while it costs $40 to manufacture each one, leaving her with a profit of $10 per unit. She sells 30 toilets in a year, giving her $1,500 into revenue and $300 in profit. It's simple math, and which we apply to Tom as well, and we see that he makes $800 in revenue, and after deducting expenses, has a profit of $400. The profit is an objective measure of performance, and it's clear that between these two, Tom makes more profit. But the question is, are they both viable? So viability is a subjective measure of profit because it really depends on the entrepreneur's perspective, which you will appreciate can vary from one to another. Entrepreneurs may compare this profit with a wide variety of benchmarks. These could be certain levels of income expectations, looking at what other existing income sources they have, the level of effort required, the risk that is involved in this business, what other opportunities might be available to them given their skill set and capabilities. So in this example, we look at the $300 profit from sanitation for Seda. That might be actually significant compared to the $500 that she makes from other sources. And she might actually consider this business to be viable. Tom, on the other hand, he may be content with the $900 that he's getting from other occupations. It could be agriculture, it could be something else. And he may consider the sanitation business to be unviable because of the additional effort, the investment, and the risk involved. This comparison with other income sources. Sorry, I just want to confirm if the screen is visible for everybody. I just want to pause for a moment. Okay, great. I'll just continue with that. Thank you. Yeah, so as I was saying, this is just one illustration of a benchmark that entrepreneurs might use to assess the viability. And given that viability is subjective, we still propose that in general, increasing profit improves viability because the primary incentive of economic benefit to operate the business becomes stronger. And the last factor that we're looking at is sustainability, is forward-looking in that we seek to understand if enterprises will remain viable year after year. Will the enterprise continue making money and keep the entrepreneur invested year after year? Is the profit adequate for reinvesting in the business? Maybe they might need to buy some equipment or replace some equipment while providing income to the entrepreneur. And most importantly, can the enterprise remain viable even after a program ends and they no longer get any form of donor subsidized support? So let's pause for a moment to just understand your perspective. Is it essential for MBS programs to track and analyze financial performance, or can they rely on other means to ensure that these enterprises are both viable and result in successful outcomes? I'll just request the CKM team to take over screen controls so we can see the results as they come in. Yep. So you can, again, just to repeat, you can use the code that appears up on the screen, or you can use the link in your chat. While responses are still coming in, we can see a strong favor in terms of wanting to assess financial performance. And great. So we will revisit this question later, but irrespective of your answer, our aim is to demonstrate the kind of that we can draw from such financial statements. Back up. Great, thank you. So our approach started by partnering with 3 interventions to interview about 66 active enterprises to measure their performance and understand how they ran their businesses. We also interviewed those who exited and a couple of other market actors to get a broader view on viability, as well as the kind of market level interactions that were occurring. So the first step, we built ground up detailed annual profit and loss statements for these 66 enterprises. In the commercial world, these financial statements provide a foundation to analyze the health of enterprises and the drivers of their performance. And we did the same for sanitation enterprises because they aren't any different from any other commercial enterprise. So 2 important metrics emerged from these statements. One is revenue, which is an indicator of how much an enterprise has sold, and profit, which is the money left from revenue after deducting all expenses, and is the metric that the entrepreneur ultimately cares about. So in each country, we categorize the enterprises sampled as low or high along these 2 dimensions of revenue and profit, using thresholds. For instance, for revenue, we use the median of all enterprises in the sample for a country to classify them as either high revenue or low revenue. So using this approach, we were able to identify enterprises that were generating little in terms of revenue and in terms of profit, indicated in the bottom left quadrant. Then moving to the right, we found those that were successful in generating sales, in generating high revenue, but they were unable to translate that sales into a significant profit that you see in the bottom right quadrant. Now moving up to the top right, we had the most successful enterprises that were generating both high revenue and translating that revenue into significant profits. And finally, to the left, on the top left, we see a few enterprises that made high profits despite actually uh, having relatively low revenue. So in the next step, we selected several pairs of these low profit and high profit enterprises and compared a metric called gross profit from the profit and loss statement. I will explain the meaning of the gross profit in a moment. But for the moment, the comparisons helped us identify which of the 5 drivers of profit differentiated their performance. This then led us to examine what were the underlying business practices adopted by the enterprises, the market conditions of locations where they operated, to understand how that impacted their profits in more depth. And in the last step, we found that distinct paths emerged that low profit enterprises could adopt to improve their profit and viability. So we'd like to clarify 3 metrics from these profit loss statements that we use to categorize enterprises as well as analyze performance in our study. Revenue, as we explained earlier, is price times the volume sold and primarily indicates the entrepreneur's ability to sell or scale. Gross profit is the money left after deducting the raw material and the labor expenses that go into manufacturing each toilet and selling it. The gross profit is an indicator of how well a sanitation enterprise manages both its sales and operations to be able to translate each dollar of revenue into a profit, hopefully positive. At the bottom, you can see is the cash net profit, which is the money left after deducting all other expenses, or sometimes the term overheads also used, such as rent, transportation, etc., from this gross profit. Now, to categorize enterprises, we use cash net profit, which is the money left after deducting all expenses, because that is the money that the entrepreneurs take home or use some of it to reinvest in the business, and that's the one they use to assess the viability of the sanitation enterprise. But we did not compare enterprises using this metric because it accounts for operational expenses that might not be wholly influenced by the sanitation enterprise. For example, the location of the workshop, the type of vehicle that might be used for deliveries, those are choices that might have already been decided because the entrepreneur might have an existing business, as many of them that we interviewed did have. So therefore, the rent and transport and expenses over here not really decided because of this sanitation business. But what you'll appreciate is because the other businesses that these entrepreneurs have can vary from one entrepreneur to another, it is not a like-for-like comparison. The gross profits, on the other hand, are exclusively impacted by entrepreneur strategies and market conditions pertaining to the sanitation enterprise alone. So how they sell toilets, how do they manage the raw material, the labor costs. And so gross profits are comparable across enterprises to understand why one performs better than the other, which is our central question. So the other point that we'd like to highlight, it is reasonable to compare this metric because cash net profit is largely a function of gross profit. So the higher the gross profit is, then consequently higher the cash net profit, which, as we have established, is of interest to entrepreneurs. So with that, we'll now move on to our findings and recommendations. So contrary to attempts by many interventions to set up sanitation enterprises as full-time businesses, we find that such businesses are often not viable. First, income from sanitation may be low, and then it is also very often seasonal business. Sales often drop during the rainy season, and they pick up during the harvest season when households have perhaps more money at hand to be able to make large ticket purchases. So the income amount and the pattern of these fluctuations is maybe not attractive for many entrepreneurs who desire more stable cash flows and a reasonable amount. But sanitation is attractive if you consider it as a business line alongside an entrepreneur's existing business, especially one that is related to sanitation in some form because it offers several advantages. So related businesses that we've seen typically manufactured concrete products of different kinds, or they dealt in building materials like sand, cement, sand that went into the manufacturing of toilets. So the concrete product manufacturers that we interviewed, for instance, already had several advantages, such as one, they had existing workshops or land where they could actually just set up a sanitation enterprise as part of that setup. They had most of the materials and the skilled labor that was required to build toilets. Some of them actually had vehicles also that they were using for procuring supplies or to make deliveries to customers. And lastly, they also had an existing base of customers to whom they could actually approach for selling toilets. So while the related businesses had little in terms of startup costs for entering the sanitation market, other than, say, purchasing molds for making pit rings or for casting a slab that might have been unique for the sanitation business. For such enterprises, even if toilets sold once in a while, the material and the equipment was not lying idle. They were, in fact, utilized by the main business. So while income from sanitation as a full-time, standalone business may be inadequate, it becomes attractive as an additional source of income for entrepreneurs with existing businesses. We therefore recommend that programs intentionally recruit experienced entrepreneurs, those who have demonstrated. Sorry, can I ask?
Please make sure that you are on mute when you join.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we just repeat. So we recommend that programs recruit experienced entrepreneurs, those who have demonstrated an ability to run a business successfully, and especially those that have a business that is related to sanitation in one way or another. So the comparisons of different enterprises reveal that high profit enterprises that you see depicted to the right leverage one or more of 5 drivers to generate profits compared to the enterprises to the left that's indicated by the red color bar. The first is to increase the number of customers or toilets sold. Scale offers several benefits, the primary of which is the amount of profit. Everything else being the same, the more you sell, the more you profit. The second is to charge a premium by signaling some sort of advantage to the customer for purchasing the toilet from this particular enterprise compared to, say, local competition. In this case, more the price compared to the expenses that an enterprise incurs, higher is the profit that it generates. The third is to lower costs, primarily of raw materials and the labor that make up the bulk of a cost for sanitation enterprises. And then the fourth is to improve what we call as the product mix, such that highly profitable products account for a larger share of sales in an enterprise's product portfolio. And the last is to capture a greater share of the customer's total spend on a toilet by offering additional products. Typically, these are the toilet shelter components like tiles and bricks, items that the customer would have otherwise gone and purchased elsewhere in the market. Say, for example, a hardware store. So a couple of practical points come out from this. For one, the combination and the importance of these 5 drivers vary in how one enterprise derives an advantage over another. Not all of these profit drivers will be of importance for a given enterprise. For instance, a high profit enterprise might have an advantage in just 2 drivers. They might be able to get a good number of customers. That is the first bar that we see. Second bar that we see, the number of customers. And they might be selling additional sanitation related products compared to the local competition, or for instance, a low profit enterprise. So in fact, some of these profit drivers may also be in conflict with each other. For instance, the prices and the number of customers have a negative correlation. Generating higher profits, therefore, is not necessarily a function of all 5 drivers, but it's a combination that suits a particular enterprise. But for the purpose of the study, where we wanted to understand what's the underlying practices for each of these drivers, we examined several pairs of enterprises. I will turn to look at what these practices are for each of these drivers and what implications they raise for enterprises and for programs. So investing in sales agents, wherein these agents are independent individuals selling toilets on behalf of enterprises, often in exchange for a sales commission, is a primary tactic differentiating the scale of enterprises. Apart from such commission sales agents, enterprises, especially those that we had interviewed in Cambodia, we saw often partnered with influential local leaders such as commune councillors or village leaders, and in those cases they might have done it for free because these leaders may have had non-financial incentives such as a genuine interest in developing the community, or they might have had political aspirations as well. Other tactics include offering customers credit in the form of installments that were typically paid back within, say, around 2 to 3 months. Or they actually also helped facilitate access to credit from an MFI, or to help households avail subsidies if such opportunities were present in the markets where they were operating. Some enterprises also expanded geographically to adjacent villages, adjacent districts that might have been, say, over the border, and therefore increased their total addressable market. However, as you would appreciate, credit and geographical expansion, these involve factors that are not fully in the entrepreneur's control. Therefore, programs should encourage enterprises to employ commission sales agents to drive sales. This mechanism offers an advantage in that there is little to no upfront investment because the agents get paid only when they bring a customer who actually goes through with a purchase. And this practice is also essential because most entrepreneurs are reluctant to leave their businesses and actively go sell door to door, which is often required to persuade customers to be able to purchase toilets. So now looking at pricing, it's primarily a function of competition. When upfront, many low profit enterprises were challenged by the inability to raise prices and improve their profits, because doing so meant they risked losing customers to their local competitors. In fact, for some of these enterprises, the fear prompted them to charge lower than the average that was going on in their market where they operated, leading to a significant erosion of their profits. But we did observe that some high profit enterprises were able to charge higher prices despite facing competition by marketing themselves as high quality suppliers. They adopted tactics like increasing the amount of cement, sand, the raw materials that went into constructing a toilet, and demonstrated that to customers sign of the product being more durable and therefore also being able to justify a higher price. From an engineering perspective, adding materials or increasing this material quantity may not have improved durability or just a structural integrity, but customers may have perceived this otherwise. And therefore, we recommend that implementers help enterprises by monitoring local prices and advising entrepreneurs on pricing levels to ensure that at the least they're not discounting significantly to the detriment of their ability to generate profits. We'll now turn to costs. A few enterprises that we had identified earlier that were able to generate high profits despite making low revenue demonstrated some interesting methods to lower costs. For one, they re-engineered the toilet designs. I'm sorry, can I ask everyone to please go on mute? Yep. So they re-engineered toilet designs by reducing the quantities of cement, sand, etc., while still delivering a safe product. Some also adopted lower cost substitutes such as burnt brick chips that were sold at almost throwaway prices by the brick kilns because that was considered as waste. Others, and this was used to replace stone or gravel. There were others that actually tried to use refurbished pipes without any particular issues. In these cases, customers may plausibly not have discerned any changes in quality or durability because the bulk of a toilet is below ground one installed. So it's out of sight and it's out of mind then. And some entrepreneurs, when we look at labor costs, also manage to reduce that by manufacturing these products themselves or roping in their family members where it was considered free labor instead of hiring paid workers. When we look at some of the high profit enterprises, a few of them demonstrated this practice where they ordered raw materials in bulk from the suppliers in order to secure discounts or get free transportation, which can be expensive in some markets. So among these various cost reduction practices, raw material reduction and substitution are promising approaches because very often toilets in rural markets are over-engineered without offering any structural or quality advantages to the customer. Programs can also share the sales trends so that enterprises can manage by hiring temporary workers to supplement or augment the capacity during peak seasons when orders tend to increase. That's a mechanism that helps them manage their labor costs over the year. The composition of sales by the type of toilet or the product mix is an important factor as well. Now let's illustrate that for a better understanding. In this example, we have two enterprises, A and B. Both offer direct pit latrines that carry a profit of $10 each. But between these two, only B sells an offset toilet, which has a much higher profit of $40. So A sells more than B, that's 5 toilets, and one would expect A to make more revenue and profit. But because B also sells the offset toilets, each one of them that is carrying 4 times the profit of a direct pit latrine. In this illustration, the sale of just one unit led to B making more profit than A. So this example stresses the importance of including high margin products in their product portfolio, because for enterprises, even if they sell occasionally, they can have a significant impact on the profit. So programs can help guide enterprises on this benefit, explain it to them of the value of stocking high margin products in their product portfolio. Now, enterprises can also increase their revenue and profit by stocking and selling items related to the construction of a toilet, but it's typically not sold by the competitors. The majority of high revenue enterprises that we studied in Cambodia and India pursue this practice by selling items such as cement, bricks, tiles, doors, the kind of things that you require to build the superstructure. And that's because many of the competitors restricted themselves to selling only, say, the substructure comprising of the pit rings, the slab with the pan, basically the toilet interface, but not the other components that a customer would have required. The value is that customers would have purchased these items from someone else if this enterprise wasn't selling. But by stocking such items, the enterprises offered customers the convenience of purchasing most, if not all the items that are required for a toilet at one location instead of having to shop around multiple suppliers. So revenue, and by extension profit, which would have gone to other suppliers, was therefore captured by sanitation enterprises, thus increasing what we call as the share of the customer's wallet, or the total spend on a toilet. But this practice, or the ability to do so, really depends on two factors. One is that entrepreneurs need sufficient capital or access to credit to be able to stock this additional inventory. And the second is just the willingness of customers to shop at one location. The latter might not always be the case, because in some markets, customers may have a preferred supplier for certain items. For example, I will buy tiles only from a hardware store, or they might actually just be willing to shop around and find the best bargain for each of these items. Programs do have the benefit of formative research to understand what are the kind of preferences customers have, what is the buying behavior, how do they go about purchasing or building a toilet, and they can use it to advise enterprises on the kind of additional items that if they stock would improve their financial performance. We'll now turn over to sustainability, which is long-term viability, for which we examine two factors. The first is financial independence, or the ability of enterprises to pay for all their expenses without grants or from donors. These include recurring expenses such as raw materials, sales commissions, and long-term expenses such as replacing equipment once every few years. The second is operational independence, or the ability of enterprises to interact directly with other market actors, which could include your sales agents, suppliers, credit providers, without ongoing continuous intermediation by a program. Now, we found that in both cases, the approaches that the program adopted had an important role to play. In one program, enterprises were encouraged to bear all expenses right from the start. So they were also solely responsible for coordinating with their sales agents, conducting meetings with them, tracking how the order flow and how they were performing in different places they were visiting. And also, these enterprises were responsible for procuring supplies by themselves. So these enterprises were likely to be sustainable because, let's say, a program ended, or for any reason the program suddenly stopped support for them. The enterprises were already accustomed to paying for all their expenses and dealing with market actors and generating profits. In other words, these were sustainable. By contrast, we saw examples where a program paid and managed some sales agents to demonstrate the benefit of this mechanism. What's the value in hiring sales agents? And they continue to do so for some enterprises that were still unwilling to pay or manage these agents. Another one loaned molds for free to help these entrepreneurs kickstart the sanitation enterprises. And it also imported and supplied sato pans, which were one would consider as necessary interventions required to develop the market. However, in both these situations, we estimated that if enterprises had to pay for the expenses that they had neither accounted for nor were they accustomed to paying, their profits would reduce. For low profit enterprises, they were particularly vulnerable because these expenses would become unaffordable and therefore the business would become unviable. From an operations perspective that we see to the right, enterprises that expected programs to play the role of an intermediary or a supplier on an ongoing basis, such enterprises were at risk because this support is temporary. Therefore, it raised the question of their ability to continue over time without this kind of support. So in summary, programs must plan for and ensure that enterprises are unsubsidized and they can operate without support as early as possible in the program cycle. Our first recommendation looks at how low-profit enterprises that you see to the bottom can adopt strategies that leverage one or more of these drivers. 3 paths were identified for low-profit enterprises to take, and each one entails a distinct strategy and trade-offs. For low-revenue, low-profit enterprises, they have 2 potential paths. They can stay small by maintaining existing prices and the number of customers, but then increase their profit by adopting a cost reduction strategy. They can optimize for raw material costs, labor costs, or both of them. But the trade-off is that such a strategy is typically non-scalable because customers might be attentive to raw materials as markers for quality, and avoiding paid labor limits the production capacity of an enterprise. So this strategy is ideal for those entrepreneurs who are content to remain small, and you will find such entrepreneurs in the market. But they could be constrained by the low demand in their micro market where they operate. If there is only that many customers, then their always be low. In the second path that these enterprises can take, to repeat, that's the low revenue, low profit enterprises, they can adopt a revenue focused strategy if they aspire to grow. They have the financial resources and the managerial capabilities, and also the fact that they should be situated in a high demand micro market. This entails following practices to acquire more customers, such as employing sales agents, expanding geographically, thereby increasing their revenue and therefore their profit. They can also invest in quality and attract more customers, especially where over-engineering is seen as a sign of quality by customers. They can also earn more from each customer that walks through the door by stocking relatively high profit products and items for the superstructure that are not sold by the competitors. But as you will appreciate, this strategy is challenging because it requires several business practices that must be implemented simultaneously, which means requiring the entrepreneur needs to have adequate financial capacity, management capacity, as well as favorable market conditions. The third path is for high revenue, low profit enterprises that have a demonstrated ability to acquire customers. they should focus on increasing the profit that they earn from each customer. They can cut costs, increase prices, or do both. Raising prices may result in them losing a few customers, which some enterprises might actually be able to afford if the net result by doing this math shows that it results in an increase in the profit. They could also modify the product system to include higher margin products and selling additional sanitation related products that can help increase the gross profit that they earn from each sale. So in summary, the strategies that the enterprises adopt really depends on their capacity, the market conditions, and also the motivation of the entrepreneur to grow the sanitation business. Among our other recommendations, first and foremost, programs should avoid creating new standalone sanitation enterprises as a full-time occupation for the entrepreneur. Inadequate income will likely lead them to exit the market. However, as we've shown, as a supplemental source of income and one that leverages the entrepreneur's existing assets such as land, skills, and vehicles, sanitation becomes attractive as a business line for the entrepreneur. Second is that not all enterprises can be in practice. Some might simply not have the resources or have supportive market conditions to be able to grow. The entrepreneur also may simply lack motivation to grow or improve profits for the sanitation enterprise. And this may be because they might favor their attention or focus their attention on their other business. So implementers should recognize such limitations while supporting sanitation enterprises. Ideally, when implementers are recruiting experienced entrepreneurs, they should recruit anybody who's willing to start sanitation enterprises, irrespective of their stated growth aspirations. But as time passes by and the enterprise's performance data emerges, implementers should focus their resources and place bets on entrepreneurs who demonstrate both the desire and the potential to improve the viability. This is important because the longer term goal of an implementer should be to strengthen supply in the market. That's the total supply. And that can be achieved or fulfilled by a few but viable sanitation enterprises compared to having many, many more unviable enterprises. So the game is not necessarily only about the number of enterprises. Programs can also enhance the sustainability of enterprises by minimizing and eliminating ongoing dependencies on subsidized support. Programs need to plan for making enterprises aware of all the costs and pay for them as early as possible. Where they have a direct role to play in the market, either as intermediaries or suppliers, they should plan for withdrawal, allowing enterprises and other market actors to interact directly with each other, or they could transition such roles to local actors. And last, MBS programs should broaden the scope of the monitoring systems to track enterprise performance metrics beyond sales. Tracking such metrics enables programs to understand the strategies that might be applicable in their context. It helps them identify the enterprise that shows some promise and also help embark these enterprises on a path to actively strengthen the supply in the overall market through viable and sustainable sanitation enterprises.
Thank you so much, Subhash. We'd like to open it up now to questions, so keep dropping your interesting questions and discussion in the chat box. I'd like to kick off with one of the interesting threads coming and currently being discussed in the chat box. a discussion around this recommendation of standalone versus a side sanitation. I would like to turn it over to Rishi Agarwal, the Managing Director of FSG, to take a shot at answering this question. Can you talk a little bit more, broaden that recommendation based on some comments and discussion in the chat box, and where you see there is potential or some exceptions for when a standalone business may be viable, and when it generally is not, and that's our learning from the study. There was also some comments in the box about when it may be viable around what type of entrepreneur you target versus are we looking at only entrepreneurs that are new to the market or experienced entrepreneurs that are already in the market? Over to you, Rishi.
Thanks, Jesse. So it's always an interesting one because when we did the initial desk review 3 years ago, we saw there have been a litany of programs to try to make Masons into entrepreneurs with very limited time. And that was one of the reasons why we went in and tried to understand what kinds of entrepreneurs would also succeed. So while if it's a retrofit, if it's a small alteration to an existing facility, it's easier. A full new toilet with pit and a superstructure tends to be difficult to be done by a completely new entrepreneur because you're not just asking them to have sanitation skills, you're asking them to have business skills. You're asking them to have an understanding of how to run an enterprise, what does profit look like, how to manage working capital, how to do collections, how to do sales, which we have found is quite tough. So working with individuals who already have a business, ideally a related business, and a related business doesn't have to be construction. It can even be a hardware shop, is generally much easier for them to pick on this business. Now, the motivation question is a secondary question, and an important one. But in terms of whether standalone Masons, we haven't really seen anywhere where this has been done at scale, where Masons have built into, or new Mason who never had an enterprise form successful sanitation enterprises. Again, as Subhash highlighted, there's high seasonality, there is generally patchy demand. The only place where it has worked is in Bihar, for instance, where the government of India gave a massive subsidy to each household to go build a toilet, which was a direct cash transfer. In that case, where affordability and latent demand questions were addressed, it was possible for a period of time till it reached a certain saturation for even standalone enterprises to work, but that was just for that a unique window of opportunity.
Great, thanks. Subhash or Jeff Albert, who's the Deputy Project Director for WASHPaLS, have anything to add? Right.
Yeah, I think we covered it.
Well, on this, Subhash, go ahead. No, I think this broader question of viability is a really important one, and Monty Achenbach from Transform Wash in Ethiopia is suggesting that that they actually are seeing examples of standalone businesses, standalone sanitation businesses in rural Ethiopia. I guess, and I'll kick this back to Subhash and Rishi, but my initial observation is that that's probably something of an outlier and something we really want to document carefully because it indicates some success that we've with a standalone focus that really area.
Yeah, I think it just might have just lost the last bit there. And yes, I think this is interesting to see an example working over here, but more broadly for Masons, their fundamental business model is different. It's service oriented. They build to order, rarely buy stock materials, which is often what we've seen has worked for these enterprises. So it's good to see an outlier over here. Should be able to.
Yeah, and it'll be worthwhile tracking that and documenting it, as Jeff is saying, because at the end of the day, as more data emerges, so should the theory change. We are just going by what's the data available so far. At no point we are saying this is absolute.
Great, thanks. I want to pick up on another question series that was going on in the chat box around financing options for sanitation enterprises and offered by sanitation enterprises. Some offer loans or credit terms, different payment options. How important is access to financing and offering of financing to their sales for enterprises? It's not mentioned as one of the, say, core 5 drivers in the analysis, but can you talk a little bit how important it is and how it figures in? And then the second part of that being, can you talk about the enterprises that you have experience with that have offered credit or payment terms? What type of profile do they have? What do they need to make that available? We'll start with Rishi again.
Sure. In terms of profile, I'll let Subhash answer that. So we are not saying that's not a problem. If you've read this review, you would identify that financing both for customers and entrepreneurs has been highlighted as a key barrier to scale of sanitation markets. But that's a scale question. In terms of viability of enterprises, we have seen various situations. So if it's an existing enterprise, they tend to have access to capital, whatever mode they have, whether it's a friends and family, whether it's a non-banking lender. In very rare cases, there will be an NBFC, and we haven't seen a bank come in to give loan to these enterprises ever, at least in our experience. So that's the whole gradation we have seen. I think it is important on the customer side to have access to either a loan through self-help groups, saving loan associations, whatever sort of a microcredit platform is available, because that unlocks the latent demand, and latent demand is a key barrier for scale of sanitation markets and enterprises to be viable. The more demand there is, the more likely the enterprise would remain engaged for a long period, and the households will be able to afford the product they're selling. So on that side, there is, in terms of, did we see enterprises give credit? Yes, we did in some cases. I'll pass on the baton to Subhash to answer in terms of the profile part of it.
Thanks for the Rishi. So just to add, in terms of the enterprises that were offering credit, it had more to do with local commercial norms. We've often heard entrepreneurs say that it's not just for sanitation. It is customers tend to expect some form of credit in this market, and therefore we have to offer it in order to secure that sale. And as far as those that were able to access finance, we particularly look at the enterprises that PSI supported in India, where they helped them partner with a few local microfinance institutions. Enterprises, or rather more specifically the entrepreneurs who were willing to go through that process in terms of helping with the data, so that PSI could demonstrate that these were viable businesses. They were the ones who got access to credit the first time, and those who continue to maintain such relationships with these MFIs continue to get credit independent of PSI's involvement thereafter. So it's really about, it actually goes back down to motivation and, of course, the fundamental profitability of the business.
Jeff, anything else to add? All right. If not, we'll move on to another good question here. This is more on accessing data from enterprises. So there was a question about how easy was it for us to get that data? How might an implementing partner go about getting data from enterprises? You can imagine it might be something that's sensitive and difficult to get. How would they go about setting up M&E systems? Are there any tools? And what is your experience in that area?
Again, I can go first. Subhash and the team led the whole data collection, so I guess he's better placed to answer this. But this would not have been possible without the strong relationships our implementing partners, PSI, Watershed, and WaterAid had with those entrepreneurs. Right? So there was no way we would have gone in and gotten this data on our own. So I just want to really highlight that strong relationship that allowed us to get that data. While these entrepreneurs might not be keeping books in the traditional sense, they're smart people. They're running enterprises. They do understand what profit looks like. Mentally, they might be using a different metric. So what the process we followed was actually had 3 to 4 hour interviews with them, understanding and building their P&L with them. So it was an involved exercise. Once you have done this and built a P&L for an enterprise, I think it's easier to update it over a quarterly basis and keep track of the financial health of the Subhash?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one of the practices that we benefited from most is to first we visit the enterprises, at least say do a pilot, get an understanding of how they actually track their revenue or can speak about the revenue and the sales. How is it that they consider cost? Because there are a variety of models that are available in the market. So if I just take the example of cost, you might want to ask questions like how many cement bags, how many toilets does one cement bag make? And they would be able to give you an answer. If you ask them that how much cement goes into each toilet component, that might not necessarily work. So that initial research, the formative research, will be required to get an understanding of how entrepreneurs really think about it. And then from there on, it was easy to ask the same set of questions to the entrepreneurs in that given market. And yes, they are sensitive. We did get many times you got questions like, "Why are you asking this? Are you looking at taxation? Are you going to report it to anybody?" And then, as Rishi did say, we relied a lot on our partners. But the fundamental promise that we were trying to make was that we need to understand how you're doing and what programs can do to help you improve the business. And that really facilitated many of the conversations. As far as resources go, I think we will just address that.
I lost the last part of what you said, Subhash. Are you handing over to Jeff?
No, I'm saying it's as far as the resources go about how they might be able to collect that. I said we'll just address that in a bit.
Okay, great. All right. The next question is a bit broader, but coming from John Brazzo. And I'm synthesizing his question here, but how does this focus on viability in this study link to broader social objectives of this sanitation work? What is the contradiction between achieving viability or profitability in a sanitation enterprise versus achieving the social objectives of our efforts in sanitation?
Again, I can take a first crack at that. So, John, the way we see it is this is not the full solution. Markets are not the full solution. Markets are a key part of the solution. And therefore, from a social perspective, what we are trying to do is make the process efficient for all entities involved, including the government, in terms of where their investments are required. So the further markets can go in terms of servicing the public demand, the less the government has to invest in subsidies, and therefore the social good of subsidies can be maximized. And the only way markets will be going further down is if it's viable for them to access that part of the market. And that's what we are trying to address here. We're trying to sort of say if the markets cover 30% of the population today, can they cover 70% of the population? And then the balance 30% might still need subsidies, which can then again be accessed through markets. So that's what we are aiming for. But again, we've always said this market-based sanitation is not only arrow in the quiver when we are trying to address this problem.
If I could also just add something quickly, I think that's a fantastic question from John. Here, we have to remember that delivering high quality, durable toilets to the underserved requires these functioning value chains, and so a lot of this welcome effort at nurturing these value chains has in what in our judgments seem not to sufficiently characterize what the drivers of success and failure of these enterprises were. And so I don't know, I'm not aware of
Oops, sorry, looks like
Yeah.
Jeff is breaking up again. Sorry, Subhash, did you want to jump in?
About that.
Yeah.
I'll type
Yeah.
it. I'll type it. Yeah.
Sorry about that, Jeff. Yeah, so I'll just add, I think this is worth calling out an example of many of the examples of many of the enterprises that we interviewed in Cambodia, where one would argue in some communes, the markets were maturing. They were achieving high sanitation coverage. And this was a situation where even subsidies that were targeting the ID poor 1, poor 2 households, it was going hand in hand with these businesses. It was reinforcing their viability. Because apart from, say, unsubsidized sales to customers who were able to purchase these toilets themselves, the programs are also able to sell it through these NGO or subsidy programs. And that also benefited the business, while at the same time benefiting customers who otherwise would not have been able to afford market prices. So it just goes to say that MBS, as Rishi was saying, can work in tandem with other approaches as well.
Great, thanks. The next question, maybe we'll start with you this time, Subhash. In the presentation, you made mention of the sanitation businesses are unstable, and then in another instance, you mentioned that there is a need to recruit experienced personnel to manage the sanitation. How do you reconcile the erratic nature of the business and the need to invest in experienced human resources, and potentially the need also to subsidize parts of the service? Over.
Yeah, thanks. I think the distinction that we'd like to draw here is you need an experienced entrepreneur, typically with an existing business, and where they have a degree of, say, stability, a base of income that is already at play. So in that case, even if sanitation, if it tends to be seasonal and the income fluctuates, it is fine for the entrepreneur because they're not solely dependent on that. As far as, and if I understand the question correctly, as far as human resources go, which might be labor for the sanitation enterprise, again, that demonstrates maybe the importance of recruiting those where the labor can be deployed either for the sanitation enterprise or for the main business as well. It's not labor that is dedicated for one business or the other. I think that just brings in a great amount of benefit.
Jeff, Rishi, anything to add?
Oops, I think I might have frozen.
No. You are frozen. Oh, you're back. Don't worry about it. All right. Another question. I'll start with Rishi again this time. So there's a couple questions on maybe how this analysis, this method, or maybe some of the recommendations in learning could apply outside of the narrow scope of the study, which was focused just on enterprises selling and constructing toilets. But how might this apply if you were to go to, say, a non-rural area, peri-urban or urban? Could it apply? Could the tools apply? Could the lessons apply? Or how about non-toilet focused enterprises, say, obviously the adjacent fecal sludge management or operations of other sanitation services?
Sure. So the principle of using profit and loss to understand viability and sustainability is universal, right? So I mean, we did not invent this. We actually borrowed this from traditional equity research, equity analysis approaches, where you would be looking at financial ratios to say, is an enterprise healthy? Is the enterprise likely to succeed? Should we invest in this enterprise? So this is broadly applicable. Now, the exact methodology we followed might not work for an asset-heavy business like FSM, where you are looking at the emptying truck being a major asset, for example, right, which will have to be paid for. There you can still do a profit and loss analysis, but you'll have to ensure that it's not done at a gross margin level, but you go below where you include net profit after depreciation and interest, because those will be a major component of that. Now, it's getting technical, but all I'm saying is you can use the approach, but not the exact templates when it gets to doing this analysis for others. You'll have to ask yourself, what is the most important factor, important investment in this business, and therefore what should I be monitoring? But financial analysis, I think, can be applied universally.
Subhash, Jeff, anything to add? All right. There's a couple other threads in the chat box and questions that surround maybe things that are outside the control of a sanitation enterprise. For instance, elements of governance. We already talked a little bit about financing, but that's included too. Can you talk a little bit about how those factors may influence sanitation enterprises, and what partners may be able to focus on or think about in their work?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting to note that when you're talking about sanitation enterprises, they're not standalone entity, and I don't mean standalone sanitation enterprise, but they're not a standalone entity. They work in a system where government is a key player, right? And government can do either enable the business or hinder the business, right? So for example, most of the businesses we work with currently do not pay taxes in whatever form they're supposed to, but they do not. That lacks implementation of laws helps them currently. On the other hand, at the same time, there might be rules on books, for example, in Ghana, where landlords are supposed to only give households on rent which have toilets, which again are not implemented, which could enable the market significantly and improve viability, because again, what you're doing is you're unlocking the demand, you're making people go out and get toilets, right? And that's not a giving subsidy, that's essentially saying you have an income generating asset, you need to add on this portion. The other way we have looked at enabling framework is two other things where government can directly influence the viability of sanitation enterprises by fiscal levers, such as taxes and tariffs on import of plastic pans, taxes and tariffs on cement that goes in, plus looking at direct tax rebates, sales tax, income tax, anything else that is applicable on sanitation products. So governments and enabling framework has a significant role. It can influence viability positively or negatively. What we were trying to do is look at factors which are in control of the sanitation enterprise as part of this analysis. But again, if you go back to the desk review, you will find a whole lot of analysis and sort of data on what works, what doesn't work from the broader ecosystem.
I'll add that it also, even the local government level also matters. Many of these sanitation enterprises, they spoke historically, if maybe not in that particular year when we interviewed them, where local officials, either because of the mandate or because they were motivated, went about drumming up support, persuading households to go and purchase toilets. In India, it was, of course, accompanied by that subsidy program, but that significant influx of customers also motivated and persuaded the enterprise to remain invested in this business. It gave them a good amount of profit, say in a given year, that helped them say that, okay, I am going to continue staying in this because more and more households will eventually get formed. The demand, even if it goes down a little bit, is still there. And overall, the environment, the latent demand has been activated in that market. I think we've also looked at the same example in Cambodia as well, where commune councillors and village chiefs also played a significant role in benefiting the enterprise, and that a lot of it has to do with government policy.
All right. Maybe I'll direct the next question to Jeff to kick off. Seems like one of the most clear recommendations highlighted by the presenters is the importance of sales agents. Could you speak a little bit more about the recommendations around the financial viability of these sales agents as part of the supply chain? Were these agents always subsidized in the programs you studied, and probably broader in your experience and exposure in the sector?
You know what, Jesse, because of my lousy connection, but also just because of the nature of the question, I'm going to punt straight to those guys.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they've got it ready. So.
Okay. So maybe over to you, Rishi, or Subhash, whoever just spoke. Go for it.
Okay, I can take that first, and Rishi, come in if you'd like. So it was viable because of the commissioned mechanism that was in place. As we mentioned, the sales agents, once they were trained, that was an upfront investment by the program. That was a one-time investment. But once they were trained, they went about performing this activity as a part-time business or even as a full-time business, depending on the number of customers that they were able to get. From an enterprise's perspective, it just worked very well because they didn't have to pay a dime till they got customers who were purchasing a toilet. So in that sense, it was a well-functioning mechanism in the market. And the only big difference, I would say, as far as whether all of them were subsidized or not, in the programs that they did so only for cases where the enterprise did not appreciate the value, did not understand the benefits that they were bringing, but the program was definitely motivated in terms of increasing sales for a particular entrepreneur. So it was not universal. It was on a need basis thereafter.
So a quick comment here, right? So viability is from two perspectives, the entrepreneur and the sales agent. So entrepreneur is what Subhash has covered. If you look at from a sales agent perspective, it was generally viable because either it happened to be something they were doing as an add-on to other stuff they were doing, if they were a health worker, if they were, a health activist or something else, or this was an add-on business where they did not, I shouldn't call it business, but add-on activity, revenue-generating activity, where they had no other revenue-generating option, income-generating option for them. And I'll sort of add on to what Subhash was saying and what Nicole asked in terms of facilitate versus directly participate. The places where we saw this becoming a problem is where the program paid directly to the field sales agents rather than having the entrepreneurs pay to the field sales agent. Where over a period of time when the program exited, these field sales agents were not reimbursed at all. And that led to breakdown of the whole process. So I think that's where the challenge can come.
Great, thanks. There's also a very interesting thread and question, or maybe more of a comment that's going through the chat here on how we are framing this work. As we've mentioned a number of times, we focus specifically on toilet sales and installation, and obviously that is not the entire sanitation market. And so we take that comment to heart, that we need to be careful about how we frame what the lessons we're providing here, and the learning that's provided is really focused on that piece. And that there are other important pieces of the sanitation market. And I will note that USAID also recognizes this, and for those of you that follow our solicitations, we have actually are in procurement now of a follow-on project to WASHPaLS, going to be called WASHPaLS number 2, and we have highlighted some financial viability analysis of fecal sludge management as a potential research area in that new project that'll be launching later this year. And so that is on our radar, and we do intend to keep exploring other aspects of the full sanitation market, and we will take it to heart about reframing some of this research learning on the specific piece that it's contributing to. So our first question I'll target to Rishi. We have a couple questions in the chat box about sales agents. Particularly, what are some models for sales marketing and sales agents and supporting those costs as it applies to the seasonal variability of some of the sales and profit related to sanitation businesses, and how might those sales agents be supported? One suggestion was maybe through commission, but are there other models? And where have we seen success, or were you exposed to in the study?
Thanks, Jesse. I think as Subhash has made the point, standalone sanitation entrepreneurs are not viable. A similar thing holds true for field sales agencies. So I think more often than not, what we have seen is they're not exclusively only promoting toilets, and that allows for other streams of incomes. There was also a question in terms of looking at early years of the program, and the sales volume might not be high. How do you incentivize field sales agents to sell toilets? We haven't seen substantive evidence around it. One of the things we have seen piloted in a couple of places is minimum guarantees. So you do give a minimum assured income for the first couple of years to sort of incentivize field sales agents to participate in the sanitation.
Great. Pasha, anything to add?
Yeah, they just highlight in terms of the models itself. As Rishi said, when they were part-time, it's also important to look at the other kinds of employment also that they had. We've seen the sales agents belong to savings groups that were operating locally, women's groups, where they were also able to tap into their immediate network early on. So that does address, in part, what might be feasible in the early stages of a program in terms of generating sales.
Right. Good, thanks. So as a follow-up add-on to that, there was a comment in the chat box about retaining sales agents. What are some of the strategies you've seen or exposed to in the study related to how to retain those sales agents, especially with the seasonal income or in the startup periods when they might not see that the incentives or profit? Over to you, Rishi.
Yeah, so as I said, initial period you can use minimum guarantee where you assure a certain revenue so that they stay engaged. The other retention strategies as we have looked at is making sure that this is sustainable, right? So one of the things we have seen in the past is programs tend to become the intermediary and pay the incentives to the sales agents, which does not directly come from the entrepreneur. In that case, as soon as the program exits, that relationship breaks up, and we've seen this in a couple of our case studies also, that the field sales agents stop receiving that incentive as soon as the program gets over, and that sort of leads to a collapse in that chain of the market. So I think it's important to make sure that from day one, entrepreneur is the one paying the incentive to the field sales agents, and if there is a minimum guarantee required, that's something for a fixed period of time a program can successfully.
Subhash, anything to add?
I have nothing to add, Jesse.
No, thanks. We had another maybe quite broad question come in the chat box about reinforcing who to target for sanitation entrepreneurship. The question was specifically related to SDG 1 about reducing poverty, and one of the key recommendations of our study was to not try to force standalone sanitation businesses, but target existing businesses. So can you talk a little bit more about why and how to target businesses and who to target with entrepreneurship in sanitation? Over to you, Rishi.
I mean, entrepreneurship is a broad definition, right? I mean, field sales agents are entrepreneurs because they are not getting an income from it. So it's not just looking at the sanitation enterprise as the sole entrepreneur in the ecosystem is probably myopic. So it'd be useful to sort of broaden that definition. At the same time, what we have seen is there have been enough programs which have tried to convert Masons into entrepreneurs with very, very limited success. I haven't really seen an example where that has been done at scale, viably and sustainably. That's because one of the things we have realized is product entrepreneurs or product professionals do not want to become service providers, and service providers tend not to do very well selling products. because the skill required, the capital investment required, the kind of infrastructure required tends to be very different. And that's why it's useful to not try and make masons into entrepreneurs, but at the same time, who to make an entrepreneur, a sanitation entrepreneur, as Subhash was describing, because of seasonality, because of other elements that come into play. It is important to ensure that we are looking at allied industries generally and existing.
I think Rishi dropped off, or yeah,
He's still here, but we lost the last couple of words. But if maybe you knew what he's going to say, or you have something to add, Subhash, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate and stress the point. The most important criteria is having the skills, the demonstrability to run their business with all the nuances of product and versus service that Rishi mentioned. The first and foremost is that if you don't know how to run a business, then the likelihood that the enterprise would fail and therefore you're not serving the market, then therefore remains high. So the criteria has to be very, very clear.
Rishi, did you want to finish anything else on that topic? Are you good? Okay. We have some other questions coming in about tracking information of sanitation enterprises, the ease of getting that information. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with interviewing sanitation enterprises to build those profit and loss statements? How easy was it to get that information? How did you get that information? Are there any tools available for others or strategies that you found successful?
Sure. So, I think there's sometimes tends to be a misunderstood simile drawn between not having accounting books and not understanding business. So most entrepreneurs tend to make money. That's why they continue doing what they are doing. And they know their business. They might not be able to tell you this was my profit, but they will roughly have an idea of how much cash they're making every month, and therefore it's viable to sustain it. What we did as part of our study was we actually had 3 to 4 hour interviews with these entrepreneurs and build the P&L ourselves by asking them how many units do you sell, what kind of price do you charge, how much incentive you might give, what does cement cost, how much cement goes in. So rather than having them to provide you that information on the first go, we build that P&L. But once you have that P&L, we know the variability and therefore tracking would become easier. Now here I'd like to highlight the fact that without the cooperation and the support of the 3 partners that Subhash mentioned, PSI, Watershed and Moderate, we would not have been able to get this information because for a variety of reasons, lower compliance with accounting system, tax laws, etc., the entrepreneurs would be not too open to share this information on the first go. So therefore, there is a need to build that relationship and trust for them to be able to share this information, which only comes over a period of time. In our case, that process was quite shortened by our
And I'll just add to give you a sense, we spend anywhere between an hour, hour and a half, best maybe 2 hours or so in terms of interviewing the entrepreneurs while they were on site. And we got fairly detailed information, literally the quantities that went into each kind of products, how much they were spending. And they have, as Rishi mentioned, they have this information at hand. So we also benefited from doing an early pilot to understand what kind of questions would be appropriate in terms of being able to gather this data. Once we had that in place, it was fairly easy to roll it out to the rest of the enterprises. And I think the other aspect was just in terms of tracking it later. The first time investment is high in terms of building the very first statement. But thereafter, you can ask a much shorter set of questions in order to be able to see how the enterprises are performing over a period of time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And Rishi, we had another, what could be broad question, but obviously our study was focused on understanding viability from a profit perspective. But there's questions about can market-based sanitation have social impact, or could that be a driver also for enterprises or for actors? Could you comment a little bit on profit motive versus social impact?
So, as you mentioned up front, entrepreneurs would stay on only if they make money. Now, we have come across entrepreneurs who have had non-profit motives to stay in this, and they vary from being a public leader to having political aspirations or to having just social impact aspirations. So we have seen that, but at the same time, by and large, what we are saying is for this to be sustainable over a long period, for an entrepreneur to keep playing in that market for a long time, there has to be profit involved. Now, is that profit, how high is that profit is a question mark. What we personally see is as long as it goes above the cost of capital, most entrepreneurs would be happy if it's creating an additional social impact, and they would be happy than slightly lower returns than what a pure commercial enterprise for them would yield. So it is a hybrid motive. It's not purely profit, not purely social impact, although people do exist at both ends of the spectrum as well.
Great, thanks. So some question coming in, kind of broadening a little bit beyond just the focus on the enterprise, although as it impacts the enterprise, can you talk a little bit about how important the market rules and business environment is, and what could implementing partners and funders and governments do to create a better environment for enterprises to thrive? For instance, introducing capital incentives or financing schemes, doing policy work. What can we do to help out businesses? There was one specific question coming in on how are sanitation enterprises capitalized?
Sure. So three things here. Two, what the governments can do, and one, what the government should not do. So you can start with the third one, which is government should not have a policy of indiscriminate subsidies, because we have seen that experiment fail over and over again, and has led to misaligned expectations from households that sanitation is not something that they should be spending for and government should provide for it, leading to a significant barrier for scaling of market-based sanitation. While the governments can do substantial positive enforcement of the markets is by multiple things. A, creating public goods. So Abdullah had sort of mentioned there's a large-scale communication that might be required to increase awareness, to generate the demand for sanitation in the markets, which is an important element. But look, no entrepreneur, and this is not just sanitation, even in private markets, if you look at soap, or if you look at a new category, no individual player would spend significant money creating a category unless they believe they will be able to monopolize that category for a period of time and recoup that investment. So the way it works is that investment is something that the government can put in, and that has been done successfully by a lot of governments in developing economies, right? Even in Africa, in Asia, a lot of governments have spent that money through CLCS, through mass media, ensure that there is a broad awareness of the product, of the need to have sanitation. What they can do directly is fiscal incentives. A lot of the countries, especially in Africa, do not have a cement manufacturing base, generally import plastics. Taxes and tariffs on that add up to the price substantially, sometimes as much as 100 to 200%. So removing that burden would lower the price of the product for the poor households and lead to better uptake. There are other incentives. For example, Ghana has a rule where landlords have to have a toilet in their household if they're giving it for rent. Incentives like that, which unlock demand, would be very useful and meaningful as long as they're implemented rigorously. The other one is around looking at going beyond this and sort of creating the right legal framework for markets, which goes beyond sanitation. I mean, there's generally rule of the land and less rent-seeking behavior that encourages markets.
I'll just add one more point. In terms of the public goods, I think it's fairly well accepted that the product designs that programs create, and if it's through government, which is always a permanent actor, such information is made available. That's an area that many implementers do work towards. But we also want to draw attention that those principles can apply even to the equipment that is required for manufacturing these toilets. For instance, we've seen where either the mold or so could be prohibitively expensive for such enterprises. So in terms of thinking about public goods, it's about information, mainly to raise awareness. It's about products, but then also into the manufacturing process and what kind of equipment that goes into these products. Take a holistic view on how you might be able to reduce the cost and of transactions for the enterprises itself.
And one more point on capitalization. Sorry, I sort of misanswered that part altogether. So most of the enterprises we saw had capitalized their business sanitation through either accumulated capital or through other light industries.
Sorry, Rishi, you're cutting out. Maybe just start again with your response.
Yeah. So on capitalization, what we generally saw was they were either capitalized through existing capital or through investment in other businesses where the investment, for example, if they already had a construction business, the investment required to start off a sanitation enterprise was very, very low. So that allowed them to come in. There is a space for low-cost financing or through either governments or other mechanisms, whether it's village level saving associations or MFIs. That is something that would help these entrepreneurs for sure. So that's something that could be seen as unlocking capital requirement for these.
Great, thanks. And could you expand a little bit on what role subsidies may play in the market?
Yeah, I mean, subsidies, look, at the end of the day, markets will never cover 100% of it. They don't in any sector, and sanitation would not be any different. What we recommend that subsidies be targeted. Subsidies be targeted on either means-based or any other basis the government chooses to. The poorest of the poor. And that's been done quite effectively in Cambodia, for example. I know colleagues from Choba here, they are experts at that. They can talk more about it on the comments. But that's one reason where if governments provide direct to household subsidies, where the customer still retains the choice on the kind of toilet they buy and how they install it. And that can be a meaningful way of not just providing the right quality toilets, giving the household the choice, but also encouraging the market because that money will get spent into the sanitation market.
Thanks. So this will be a bit of a long one for you, Rishi. In the chat box coming from Tyler, some clarifications on the study. But did you record profit and loss data for the entire business or just sanitation products? In their experience, business revenue sources are often mixed. Agricultural, construction, sanitation, and household expenses often come right from the business revenue without much tracking. What can you clarify the unit of analysis and when we say business? And then can you also speak to the variance in responses that you received on some of those unit costs? Were specific metrics harder, or are they reliable or not?
Sure. I think I'll also let Harsh jump in on this one. But the way we saw this come through was we actually tried to understand the whole unit rather than just sanitation enterprises. What we are presenting is the sanitation enterprise. Understand, for example, what is the working capital invested in sanitation enterprises versus the other enterprise. We had to understand that, but we did not go into the same level of detail as we did in sanitation enterprises. Right? Is it? Look, at each stage you would run into a problem, right? Because the question is, cement cost X dollars a bag this month, it costed Y dollars a bag 3 months ago, which one should you take? So what we did was we took a point in time. So although P&L should be a 12-month, we try to understand a point in time picture of the P&L to understand what's going on apart from the number of units they have sold, to try and build a meaningful profit and loss statement to track it. The household expenses do come straight out of the business, but therefore what we did was, as I said, we looked at the bill of material and looked at each quantities and said how much it costs you to buy these and build that out on a cost of goods sold basis. And that's why the analysis is at gross profit level, because we did not want to get into the overheads, we did not want to get into allocation of overheads. So this was directly identifiable cost to the business, which is what allowed us to do this analysis. Variances, yes, you will see, and that's part of doing the interview. And I think the toughest one is when you start talking profits. And that's why we try to stay away from it and build the P&L ourselves to understand the profit rather than straight away asking how much money do you make in a month or how much profit does this product generate. Vash?
Yeah, I think that Rishi, that covers it. And just to stress, I mean, up to the gross profit level, that was completely focused on the sanitation enterprise. And it's only when you start getting into some of the overheads, how much do you allocate for transport costs? That's where you might end up, the entrepreneur ends up coming to some difficulty as to like what is the utilization of, say, a truck for one business or the other. But the key point being that if you apply a consistent principle in terms of how you might be able to allocate, then you're able to get a good sense of what's the profitability of this enterprise. It's essential to clarify upfront that you understand what are the products that they require for this business, distinguishing that from everything else that they potentially manufacture also over there, and then collecting all the data at the product or the component level to be able to construct.
Also, just looking at the third question on Tyler's comments, the sanitation market matures. Yes, basic sanitation demand will not grow at the same rate, but there will always be a replacement demand. I mean, irrespective of where you live in urban areas, most of us have had a toilet for some time. It doesn't mean that there are no sanitation enterprises in our towns and cities within US, UK, Africa, Asia. So that demand will always remain. So therefore, sustainability of those channels is very important, because if you just provide a toilet and then there is nowhere to make sure that maintenance is possible, the replacement is possible after a period of time, then the whole infrastructure we have created will collapse.
And I think we'll just stress again that while we speak about hiring or rather recruiting entrepreneurs with existing business that maybe at the start of a program, that existing business becomes important even as the market matures. We've also met entrepreneurs who may have derived a significant share, say from sanitation. I'm talking about very few of them. They too, when they started to recognize that the market where they were operating is maturing, were very much interested in diversifying, but retaining that capability, the materials, the labor, in order to serve orders as and when they came in. So even if they did sell toilets, maybe not as often as before, they still retain that capability, and therefore the supply in many other ways is sustainable.
And I would like to highlight the difference between market sustainability and individual enterprises. So there would come a time when basic sanitation is very widely accepted, is available in households. At that time, the number of enterprises might fall, but the market still needs to be there. Some enterprises should still be viable and sustainable at scale, and that's important. So it's important to sort of make the distinction of markets need to be there in the long term. All enterprises might not be there, and therefore it's important to understand what gets the enterprises to that large-scale viability.
Great, thanks. Back to collecting some of the information from sanitation enterprises, there was some comments in the box related to being very careful, and sometimes there's hidden costs. And this also ties into our recommendation about how we are suggesting implementers not be directly involved in the market. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things you uncovered or things to look out for in particular? The one suggested in the chat box was be careful about transportation. Sometimes that can be hidden in the implementing partners are actually covering the transportation of, say, goods or services for the enterprises.
So, I mean, there are multiple places this would happen, and for all good reasons and in all good intent, right? So there is no malintent in these things, but which ends up skewing the business model or the P&L for the enterprise. For example, a lot of interventions have given molds for free, right? Now, that's fine if you're giving it, but if it's not priced into the price of the product, the next time the entrepreneur has to go and buy a mold because his mold is broken, then she won't be able to do so because that money is not coming from the product. She's not able to generate that profit. There might be, as I mentioned earlier, field sales agents, if they're not paid by the entrepreneur, they don't really see that as a necessity or a cost because the program has taken care of it. And suddenly the sales would collapse because the program went out and field sales agents are no longer promoting the product. Cost of private vehicles, cost of program professionals going and doing demand generation and demand activation, cost of product design, cost of catalog manufacturing. There's a lot of costs we need to ensure that a product, when we are looking at an enterprise and a P&L, needs to be fully costed. They might not be paying everything on the first instance, but over a period of time, we need to ensure that they are able to, so that the market is sustainable and they are sustainable.
Anything to add, Subhash?
Thanks. So I think the transport one, I like that as a wonderful example because that's where we did end up having to spend some time, but the principle pretty much applies to all. We did distinguish, we asked entrepreneurs what kind of vehicle you have, what's the mileage that you get, how far do you have to travel to deliver products to customers, who transports the materials, is it the supplier, is it built into the price? So we did get into like a detailed set of questions to ensure that by the end of it was very, very clear what's the cost, who was paying for this cost, whether it was the entrepreneur, it was somebody else, to be able to distinguish between, I think it's a great term, that are there hidden costs that a program might be paying, as well as ensuring that we're trying to improve the accuracy of the statements that we are constructing. So who pays, I think, is a principle that we applied throughout all the line items that we captured during this interview.
Great, thanks so much. We do have a last minute question in the chat box, so I'll try to take one more for you, Rishi. Would you make any recommendations to MBS programs to increase strength and capacities of customers to purchase as a way of growing sanitation markets? Are there any emerging best practices?
So there are 2 or 3 things we have seen. Provision of credit, as Subhash mentioned, that has been a good unlocking mechanism, especially where the price is not a problem, but the cash flow is. So being able to pay an installment generally helps in those cases. The other thing we have seen is linkages with saving associations that also help unlock demands, because then they can have provision of capital. Those are the 2 main ones we have seen. I mean, the customer has different barriers, right? Affordability, liquidity, and then just understanding that it's a product that they would prioritize over some of the other things that the household might. On that front, I think the government is doing a great job through CLTS and through mass communication. Liquidity is something the enterprises can address. Affordability is something that the enterprise can't address. That's where targeted subsidies can come in.
Right, and payment plans, right? That's another. All right, I don't see any more questions coming in, and I think we've gotten all. We've actually reached just about time, so we're going to move to the wrap-up portion. I'm going to hand over now to Jeff Albert, the Deputy Director of the WASHPaLS project, for some final comments and resources. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jesse, and thanks to everyone. That was a really rich discussion, exactly the kind we were hoping would be inspired by Subhash's presentation. And we invite you to read the WASHPaLS outputs on this work and keep the conversation going. We're going to ask you to fill out a brief survey using the Mentimeter link available in the chat while we go through just the last couple of announcements before we close. So again, it's in the chat box. But importantly, we wanted to announce the upcoming launch of 2 toolkits related to today's discussion. The toolkits are designed for implementers of MBS programs to conduct viability and sustainability assessments, the kind you just saw presented by Subhash, in their specific contexts, using the methods that you just saw presented. And implementers can deploy these themselves, or they can hire others to implement or adapt the toolkits for their own programs, objectives, and contexts. The first is designed to help new MBS programs when they're recruiting entrepreneurs. It helps programs develop financial projections for their chosen enterprise design and assess profit potential before having an involved discussion with potential entrants to the market. About the nature of and scale of the financial opportunity. The second toolkit is a diagnostic, and it's aimed at MBS programs that already have existing partner enterprises, and it helps those programs to measure and analyze financial performance, again, in the way you just saw presented, with objectives ranging from monitoring and evaluation to identifying strategies, business strategies that can improve viability and sustainability. Each toolkit has a range of resources such as financial definitions and in-depth explanations of concepts with examples, Excel templates to prepare financial statements and analyze performance. And it also contains guidance on the kinds of data required, how to collect it, potential sources, sample interview guides, and the like. And these will be available on globalwaters.org, along with the other resources from a whole array of resources from the WASHPaLS project. So that's it. Again, we really wanted to thank you for joining us for this fantastic discussion and for your feedback and your questions both during the session and in the days and weeks to come. So we're going to leave the survey open for a few more minutes. Thanks again.